A good morning, or in some cases, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, and thank you for taking the time to join us. The invitees to this webinar are, in fact, all regulators in the U.S. from federal and state agencies who have an interest, a jurisdiction, and so on around marine renewable energy. We did hold a previous webinar with a similar invitee list last March. You may have been involved with that. But today, we're going to do a quick look at the environmental effects of marine renewable energy. We are going to focus mostly on a survey that we did following that first webinar and talk to you about the results of that survey to the same regulatory community. Then I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the issue of data transferability and collection consistency for permitting marine renewable energy devices. And then I'd really like to get some input from you. So, starting out, for a number of you, this is old hat, but in case we have new people on the phone, I think we are all aware of why we like the idea of marine renewable energy as a reliable low-energy carbon source, sort of part of that all-of-the-above strategy, mitigating climate change. We do have marine renewable energy standards in many nations and many regions and states, well, states here, even though we do not have a federal standard. We also hear a lot from local utilities that they are quite concerned for the future that they are able to generate and secure energy locally. But we know stakeholders continue to have concerns around potential impacts, and that the regulatory processes for permitting, consenting, whatever you call it, are still developing. A lot of this concern really arises from the fact we have these largely unknown technologies that have unknown potential for harm. This is also a new use of ocean space. We've got a lot of other users in this space, and this is sort of a new entry. Ironically, we know less about these high energy areas of the ocean than anywhere else because it's a tough place to work. And many of the marine species that we're worried about around marine energy devices are already under stress from other uses. We have a very strong belief through the programs we run here through the Department of Energy and also internationally through the Annex IV initiative under the Ocean Energy Systems that improved information can really help. If we all have the same information base and we're all pushing forward in the same way, we have a better chance of getting devices permitted, having responsible development, but still recognizing that for any device that's put in the water, there will be some site-specific knowledge needed. I mentioned Annex IV. This is a collaborative initiative led by the U.S. We are fortunate here at PNNL to get to implement that initiative. And many of you may be familiar with a major report we put out last year called the State of the Science Report. It is available on TESIS, not only the 250-page version, but also shorter derivative products. So please go download those if you're interested. Just at a very quick snapshot level, we still continue to believe that scientific uncertainty drives a lot of the risk perception. This is somewhat good news because it means with greater data collection from monitoring and research, we can hopefully reduce some of that uncertainty around interactions between animals and devices, habitats and devices, et cetera. Whoops. What we continue to see is the most important and potentially the highest risk interactions come from collision of animals with tidal turbines, the behavioral effects on animals from underwater noise from both turbines and wave energy converters. Still a lot of questions raised about electromagnetic field effects from cables and devices. Hopefully we're making some headway there. We overall, from what we've seen around the world and in experimental situations as well as modeling, we don't expect to see much impact from single devices. As we move to larger arrays, multiple devices, there may need to be more investigation. And there's a lot more detail on this in the webinar that we gave in March, and that is all archived, the slides and the discussion. And there is a link there. Okay, what I'd really like to get into today is what we've done with the regulatory community. And what we're really trying to do is, on behalf of Annex IV and the Department of Energy, is understand the information needs that the regulatory community has, understand what the key uncertainties are that are associated with permitting these marine renewable energy devices, and hopefully to help provide some of that information in various ways. So what we did following that webinar in March is we emailed a survey to 200 state and federal regulators, and we got 35 completed responses, which I'm told a cold email survey that's pretty good for. So I want to thank anybody who engaged in that, returned that survey. We may do some of these later on as well, and if anyone who did not complete the survey would like to see the survey questions and so on, we can certainly do that. Just need to contact us. Okay, so what I want to do is talk about some of the results of that survey. First of all, what we saw was about 53% of those who 57% of those who returned the survey were from state agencies, and a smaller percentage from federal agencies. And we found that the majority had, in fact, directly participated in permitting a marine renewable energy device of some sort. We also asked about the sort of focus of the agency you worked for, and most of you work for agencies concerned with marine mammal protection, fish protection, seabed and habitat, and then other protection of other animals. We asked about what your focus, what's the main part of your job that intersects with marine renewable energy, and you see in the graph here with the federal agency responses in that dark reddish brown, state agency responses in black, you see that there's sort of a spread of those who directly review applications, those who provide policy advice to your own agencies, those who advise regulators directly, subject matter experts, writing permits, etc. So we just got sort of a sense of who was responding. We then asked a series of questions about your familiarity with marine renewable energy devices, both wave devices and tidal devices, and we named a number of them. We also asked about offshore wind. And what we found was that there wasn't great familiarity among the respondents with the different kinds of wave and tidal devices, that offshore wind was more familiar to many of them. And given the development on the East Coast and the Atlantic Coast, I'm not surprised by that. We found that the federal participants were a little more familiar with different wave and tidal devices than were the state participants. Again, the federal agencies involved have tended to had to work across the country on any applications that have come in to date. In case you're not familiar with it, that picture in the middle is a Carnegie wave energy converter. That's actually an Australian device off a Navy base in Australia. I kind of like that picture because with the two divers in it, you get a little sense of scale. And this is not yet a full-scale device, just to give you a sense there. The one on the right, I think, is the Voice tidal turbine, although it's a drawing, I think, because you see all those devices drawn in there, and nothing like that exists in the world at this point. Okay. The next thing we did was ask what particular challenges you saw, in other words, which issues were the toughest to deal with in permitting both a single device and then if you looked ahead to an array. And those 8 listed there, chemical releases, electromagnetic fields, habitat disturbance, risk of animals colliding with devices, underwater sound, avoidance, attraction, displacement, energy removal and changes in flow, and potential entanglement of animals with lines and cables. Those are the ones we listed. And then we asked you to rank them both for single devices and for arrays. And what we saw was a certain amount of variability across those, what you felt were the top issues, the top challenges. And they did vary by the federal and state agencies who responded to them, the individuals, and by the number of devices. For instance, for a single device, we found the federal agency respondents thought that underwater sound emissions from devices on animal behavior was the most important issue. State respondents felt that benthic and habitat community and habitat destruction was most important. When we went to the sort of future larger arrays, both federal and state respondents sort of grouped around the concerns of avoidance, attraction, and displacement of animals from their preferred habitats. Okay, we then asked you about your perceptions of how much data are needed, what about models, etc. And we asked posed a number of statements and asked how strong you agreed or disagreed with those statements. And we asked you to relate that to what you thought was that top challenge from the previous questions. And the kinds of things we asked were whether sufficient field data are needed to determine risks and reduce uncertainty. Do staff need to be knowledgeable and trained on these individual technologies and interactions? Do numerical models play an important role? And is there a need for agency or policy guidance to interpret risk and uncertainty? We didn't see notable differences in how federal or state respondents replied, or that they felt that these needs differed between a single device and an array. So there's a lot of agreement. The two statements that people agreed on most, pretty much unanimously, was that sufficient field data are needed to determine risks and reduce uncertainty, and that staff do need to be knowledgeable and trained on the various technologies and their interactions with the marine environment and animals. We then also asked you about what the best approach to marine renewable energy development was, and we posed 6 sort of strategies, and we defined those. The first being the precautionary principle, which I think you probably all are familiar with. That is, if there's a lot of uncertainty and potential negative outcomes, that you just should not do it. Next, we talked about the mitigation hierarchy, which many of you are familiar with, I'm sure, which says that before taking action, you should first avoid, minimize, and then mitigate or compensate. Phased approach is a term that has been used a great deal in this industry in offshore wind, and that describes putting in 1 or 2 devices, then a few more and a few more, phasing the build-out. Adaptive management is a term many of you are familiar with, perhaps from other fields, and that is a learning-based management system where you may, looking at monitoring data and outcomes, you may choose to change your monitoring scheme, mitigate, and make changes of various sorts. The 5th one, survey, deploy, monitor, is the strategy that's been used in the UK and various other parts of Europe, which involves doing extensive baseline surveys in an area, then deploying devices and monitoring. So sort of that very linked sort of set. And the last one, just do it, we made up as sort of the extreme, that we shouldn't be dealing with data collection or any of these other strategies, just put stuff in the water, which, as you can imagine, is fairly popular with the industry. And there you see the results. Again, the reddish-brown is the federal agencies, the black is the state agencies. What was interesting was that the state agencies very much favor the adaptive management approach, and I suspect that's at least a little bit because it's a familiar strategy. But I think you see that although there was a little bit of interest in the precautionary principle, there was no interest in just do it. And that the sort of mitigation hierarchy, phased approach, adaptive management were sort of that middle of the road, let's proceed but with caution. Okay, we also asked about a number of other sorts of issues around monitoring data. Do we need additional monitoring data to decrease uncertainty? We found that state regulators felt this was incredibly important. The feds thought it was important, but not as much so. And there was just a lot of variability in the kinds of answers we got here. We also, and this really sort of moves towards something I want to talk about more, we wanted to know how regulators felt about using data from one location, collected in one location, to help move forward permitting in another location within your jurisdiction. And we might call this data transferability. And we asked the question, you know, do you think this is a good idea? Can this be applied? And we were heartened that the answers were yes, absolutely, and maybe, but not never. So that's because we believe from what the investigations we've done that being able to use data collected anywhere in the world to at least support applications in local jurisdictions is one of the few ways we're going to really move forward with this industry, both responsibly and in a way that it will become an established industry. So the conclusions of the survey, there were some perceived differences in the impacts between single devices and arrays, and overall there was a perceived risk that, a perceived idea that risk increases with scale, but pretty much across the board we simply need more data than we have at the moment. As I said, data transferability seems at least fairly, encouraged. The caveats associated with the survey, as usual, there are lots of them. We did mention offshore wind energy in the beginning as far as familiarity with devices, although the survey really was trying to get at wave and tidal understanding. And we are not certain whether some of the answers really were colored by thoughts about wind energy rather than just wave and tidal, but that's okay, they're very related. It's also important to note that some questions are just hard to get at. How do you, how strongly do you feel about data needs? What is your thoughts about modeling? It's hard to get really kind of concrete answers, but overall we felt we got a great deal out of the survey, and again, I thank you if you participated. So, what we really felt was that there is a need to continue to provide outreach and engagement focused on familiarity with wave and tidal technologies, what's out there, what they look like, how they operate, how they're deployed, and therefore how they might interact with the marine environment or with marine animals. We think there's still a need to share more information on some of the highly ranked challenges, because in some cases we think we have more research results than perhaps are readily known or available, and we would like to help really make sure that that information is widely shared and widely spread. There's still lots of questions remaining. How much uncertainty is acceptable? How can we go forward and with what level of not knowing for sure? And how does this compare to other energy industries? Now, we know that a new industry always gets held to a little different standard than established grandfathered industries. But I think it is important in the energy sector to continually ask whether the questions we're asking for marine renewables, offshore wind, oil and gas, et cetera, have some comparability in terms of risk. Do we put these in the right context? We also feel that there is the opportunity to talk about data transferability and the consistent collection of certain kinds of data. And I'm not using the word standardized here because it has so many loaded connotations. What we find is looking at research and monitoring data, it's not that they aren't all collected with the same instrument, exactly the same protocol. That's way too much to ask for. But we find that certain types of interactions aren't even measured with the same parameters. And we think there could be a real way to move forward here. It's terribly difficult to compare data that are just completely apples and oranges. And we have been working with the research community to try to come together internationally, to try to come together around some of those. Key examples are how we measure acoustic output from a device and try to compare that with what we think might affect behavior of animals. And in many cases, the parameters measured are totally different. We also understand that there continues to be new research needed, and we hope that with regulator input we can help to continue to build that sort of list of really important research needs, provide that to the funding agencies to help provide guidance so that we get the kinds of answers that are helpful for the regulatory community to move these things forward. Because as you can imagine, research lists generated only by researchers don't always come to exactly the kinds of answers that you as the regulators need. Okay, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about data transferability and collection consistency. Where we see this as a real problem is there's not much access to really synthesized and contextualized data from early stage projects. There are early stage projects in this country and beyond. Some of those data sets are hard to come by, much less really understand what they mean perhaps in jurisdictions here. We haven't come up with any mechanisms that will apply data and information across geographically distinctive projects. And we really want to explore how much of that can be done and how. Again, the standardized methods for data collection I mentioned. And what we see is that all this uncertainty is really affecting investment into this industry, and it's driving up the levelized cost of energy, which is a real catch-22. High energy costs do not look like sound investment decisions, et cetera. So the goal of what we would like to do through Annex IV and the work we do for the U.S. Department of Energy this coming year is really to understand how we can get towards transferring research and monitoring information among projects. One project where it's been developed, another one where it might be applied. The value to this is reducing costs for baseline studies, post-installation monitoring, and really importantly, decreasing uncertainty and facilitating common understanding that will help move this industry forward. And I think from the regulatory point of view, it will make your jobs much easier by really knowing what tools you have in your hands. So the steps to do this. We're really trying to define this challenge. We're reviewing research and analogs from other industries, looking at criteria for transferability. Clearly, this is not the first industry or the first development stage where this question's been asked, and we are already engaged in a literature review and analysis. We will be producing a white paper on this in end of December for review. Following that white paper, and that white paper will not only summarize what we understand about data transferability potential from other industries, it will also lay out sort of a plan going forward. What we believe at this point, and clearly we haven't finished this plan, but we would like to convene some groups of regional regulators, and we will, inform ourselves from what we saw from that regulatory survey and discussions we've had with regulators. And with that group, we'd really like to try to explore the real-world challenges associated with applying data across multiple projects. We'd like to really understand what you see as the limitations and concerns with data transferability and this collection consistency. And we're still really exploring ways to do that. What we hope to do is bring together some synthetic data sets or little clips of data sets to really sit down with regulators and explore. This is what a data looks like, some video around a turbine with fish interacting. This is what data from an output of the sound of a WEC, of a wave energy converter, looks like. What do we see? What do we think is transferable? What do we think is not? We then would like to analyze the outcome from these focus groups, and then we intend to hold a workshop in June. The International Conference on Ocean Energy, ICOE, will be convening in Normandy in France. We will hold a half-day or a full-day workshop, bringing in researchers. We will also have the opportunity to bring some of the industry and others, and with luck, we'll get some European regulators as well to really kind of explore what we're hearing and how we might move this forward. This will all come into a final report that will get presented and so on and so forth, probably at the end of the federal fiscal year, so next October. So that's our plan, and we are still, the further out we get from here, the slightly more nebulous it gets, but we will have a much better laid out plan in December with that white paper. It is our plan to start trying to convene some of these focus groups, and when I say focus groups, we may sit down with 1, 2, 3, 6 regulators. We're not trying to do something major advertising type of focus group, but this is dependent on getting participation from regulators. We'd love to have your involvement. If this sounds at all appealing to you, we'll keep it to a minimum time-wise. We'll try to make it as undisruptive as possible because we know how busy you are. Please reach out to us. Let us know that you're interested. because we really do understand that we cannot move this industry forward without really understanding what your needs are and helping to provide them. Okay, so I'd just like to sum up a little bit. We think we have a little snapshot into at least what some of you feel are the important challenges and issues and methods for moving forward in this marine wave and tidal industry. We also understand that there is interest, if not wild enthusiasm, that data can be transferred from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We do believe there's still a role for better outreach and sharing of information on specific technologies, their impacts, and what we already know in the research and monitoring realm. And we are very keen to try to move forward with this concept of data transferability and collection consistency, but we know we need your help. I'd also, just as a final note, like to say that even if we were able to create a really wonderful process for sharing data, transferring it from one jurisdiction to another, we are fully aware, and we continue to tell the industry at every opportunity that no developer will come in and deploy one or more devices without data collection from that actual location. That will always be necessary. What we're trying to do is decrease the amount of sort of reinventing the wheel with collecting large amounts of data in every location, because quite frankly, this is a very small industry with sort of very precarious funding, quite honestly. And if we hope to see this as one of the many low-carbon technologies adding to our national energy grid and meeting our needs, we are going to have to find some ways forward where all of us can move towards this. Okay, so that's everything I have. I really would like to thank you for being here today. Hope you have some questions and some comments. Love to hear your thoughts about this. Also, if you aren't already on it, which is doubtful because we capture emails anywhere we can, but if you'd like to join our TIFAS mailing list, please do so. Every 2 weeks we have a TIFAS blast going out. In fact, there'll be one going out tomorrow. We have webinars and other events and so on that you could sign up to have notification for. Otherwise, I'd like to thank my team very much, Michaela Freeman, John Whiting, Simon Gearloff, here at PNNL, and the many, many researchers and developers and others who help us out worldwide under the Ocean Energy Systems Annex IV. And with that, I'm done. So I don't know if we have any questions.
And we do have a question in the queue. Caller, your line has been unmuted.
Hi, this is Brian Mukes from NOAA Fisheries. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Brian.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for organizing this webinar. I'm on the Central Coast branch for California, so and just moving to the San Francisco Bay branch. That's a long story, but I've been the essential fish habitat lead under Magnuson Stevens for the Morro Bay area, and there's a little bit of wind energy, offshore wind energy interest there. And so I would be the guy right now to contact for these upcoming focus groups, and definitely interested in that. And I just wanted to ask you all if you have NOAA contact information for some of the other leads, like Bill Foster for FERC and the marine mammal and turtle leads and other ESA listed species. Do you all have that information?
Brian, thanks so much. I'm glad to know that you're there, and we do work on offshore wind also, so that's really nice. We have some of them. To be honest, I'd love to know if you've got more. We've got a lot of the contacts on the West Coast region and headquarters, where, of course, a lot of the Marine Mammal Protection Act work has come out of, and ESA is sort of split up. But I'd love to connect with you and make sure that you may have from inside NOAA some better insights of some people that we're missing. So would really appreciate that opportunity.
Okay, yeah.
And we'd love to have you involved in our focus groups.
Definitely. Yeah, I'd love to be involved, and I'll just email you the short list that I have that I know of.
That would be wonderful, yeah, because we've been working in this area for a while, but people change jobs, and I think within the agency you've got a lot better sense of that. So great, thank you very much.
Sure, yeah.
And there are no additional questions in the queue?
Okay, everybody's very quiet. We will send these slides out to you afterwards. In fact, everybody who's on the invitation list. One interesting thing we have found with our webinars over time, especially internationally, we have less live attendance and way more downloads of presentations and questions and answers later. So we do think that that's also a good way to reach people and see these things at your leisure on your desktop. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, we will conclude this webinar a little early, and I would like to thank you for your involvement. And if you have any colleagues who would like to be added to our list, please pass this on as well. Okay, otherwise, I think we'll wrap up here, and thank you very much.
Thank you for joining today's conference. The session has now concluded, and you may disconnect.